Hey, good evening, everybody. Ted here. Hey, I want to talk with you tonight about the Keystone XL Pipeline. And the reason I want to do that is because it has recently gathered a great deal of news attention. And I think it's indicative of the state of political discourse, dialogue, or thinking in this country. And also, I think it's instructive. I could use this as a way to kind of talk to you about how I think we're going to have to navigate this I'm trying to think of the right word, miasma of disinformation, self-interested political talk, and basically manipulation of American thinking and our willingness to govern our society ourselves by the political and information classes. I know I say that a lot, and I'm also trying to work on these presentations, so it's going to be a little bit rough. These are just some numbers I pulled out. But if there's one thing I want to highlight for everybody, and I want to stress in all these videos, is don't let other people do your thinking for you. Keep in mind, the people you see on cable news, the people you see in the blogs, the people who are on Facebook, all these people who are spouting this disinformation, this misinformation, these people are a few things. One, they're not doing that for the good of society or something. Quite often they're paid for, or they're doing it because they're contracted to deliver a message to shape your thinking and behavior. The other thing is these people aren't necessarily experts. Okay, our grandparents and I say our grandparents and great grandparents, I think they had different expectations of people in the media and people in politics. I think there was a certain intellectual threshold that we expected of those leaders. I believe that is absent today. Gone are the days of Walter Cronkite and Senator Everett Dirksen, people who are respected and thought of, had high regard. So, in fact, I kind of, as I think about this, I think most politicians, if you ask them what Keystone XL is, first of all, they probably can't tell you where it is. They can't tell you the segments. They can't give you a background of it. And also, many of them probably thought it was some kind of beer or something like that. So I'm going to walk you through tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about the Keystone XL Pipeline. I want to talk to you also about the greater environmental questions, about policy, and about the Biden administration's recent decision to revoke the permit for the Keystone XL Pipeline. Some things I want to highlight for you before we begin. Some terms you're going to hear. Barrels of oil. How much is a barrel of oil? Well, a barrel of oil, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, U.S. Energy Information Administration, is 42 gallons. And this is a good point I want to highlight for you. There are two types of authority we talk about, two types of information. We have primary sources and secondary sources, right? Primary sources, for those of you who study history, primary sources are things that were done at that time by those involved. Secondary sources are usually commentary and observation, assessments of the primary sources. So for instance, let's say we're studying constitutional law. Well, we could read the Constitution. That's a primary source. We could read Madison's notes from the Constitutional Convention. That's a primary source. The Federalist Papers, that's a primary source. And then we can read commentary and observation and interpretations of those. We can read about the Constitution or whatever. And those are secondary sources. In law, we talk about there's mandatory authority and there's persuasive authority. Mandatory authority, the law, statute, administrative agency decisions, things that have the force of law, court decisions, right? Persuasive authority, those are things that are written about the mandatory authorities. Those are observations or treatises on the law. The restatements, for those of you who study torts and property and things of that nature, those friends of mine from law school, those are persuasive. They're not mandatory, but they help enlighten your judgment, to inform and shape your decisions about the primary sources or the mandatory authorities. We are so far gone from that in our country. In all the stuff I've read, seen, or heard, what little bit I've had the patience to endure on Fox, MSNBC, any of that, there's no real understanding of primary sources. No one cited the primary sources. The secondary sources, I don't even think there's anything out there. I think it's also skewed. So the primary sources I used, and I'll put them in this video in the notes. Of course, the U.S. Energy Information Administration, a government agency, the State Department, because the State Department actually did the environmental impact studies and assessments and wrote the environmental impact statement back in 2011, 2014 for the Keystone XL Pipeline. And also, as far as that goes, some other stuff I've used. Reuters has actually done some pretty decent reporting. Reuters, I really like Reuters. Reuters is very even-handed. They avoid a lot of the emotional language that we hear so often in popular media. And then, so there's that one. And then also, I've used some Government of Canada sources because the Government of Canada, of course, Keystone XL is a project of a Canadian government organization. And that's TransCanada. TransCanada is owned by the province of Alberta. So, a barrel of oil, 42 gallons, right? Got it. Second of all, well, Keystone XL. Keystone XL Pipeline is going to, if completed, okay, would use new infrastructure that would be constructed and existing infrastructure in the United States, current pipelines, to run 1,711 miles from Alberta all the way down to the U.S. Gulf Coast in Texas, to the Texas Gulf Coast. There would be 327 miles in Canada, 1,384 miles in the United States. It would pump 830,000 barrels of oil per day into the United States. This would be crude oil, and I'm going to talk about that as well later in this video. So, Keystone XL. I put the environmental impact statement in here. The executive summary is 27 pages. That's a really good read. It was written back in about 2011 by the State Department. I would offer to you to read that because they go into detail about every facet of this decision, about the impact on endangered animals, species, water, aquifers, agriculture, impact on the people, social impacts, and also they talk about the techniques that would be used to actually construct this pipeline. This pipeline would be 36 inches in diameter, so that's roughly, 3 feet, about half as tall as I am. It would run, if completed, Keystone XL would run from Alberta, Canada, south into the United States. It crossed U.S.-Canada borders. When it crossed the border, it crossed at a place called Morgan, Montana. From Morgan to Nebraska, Steel City, Nebraska, this is called the Steel City segment. That would have to be constructed. That would be 851.6 miles. Then, from there, from Steel City, it would run into Cushing, Oklahoma. And this is called the Cushing Extension. The Cushing Extension is currently existing infrastructure. Then, the penultimate segment would be from Cushing to Texas. This is referred to as the Gulf Coast Extension. So the Gulf Coast segment would run 483.8 miles from Oklahoma into Texas. And then in Texas, the last segment would be to Houston and Port Arthur, and that's 48.6 miles. It's in there. There's a great map of it, but I wanted to give you a highlight and understand the new construction is the 48.6, the 483.8, and the 851.6. Now you may ask, wow, well, since this thing's been around for some time, I think the permit they began working on this in 2008, 2011, 2014, the environmental impact studies and statements were made. And then in 2015, President Obama refused to permit it. How much of this has been completed? 1.2 miles. 1.2 miles of the Keystone XL pipeline have been actually constructed, and that's up here near the U.S.-Canadian border in Montana. So now you understand a little bit about the Keystone XL pipeline, what it is. Let's talk a little bit about the wider picture, about our relationship with Canada, but also I want to go into detail about why the Biden administration has revoked this permit. And I want to dispel a lot of the misinformation out there, but also just kind of help bring everybody's blood pressure down. I've heard and seen stuff, people saying gas is going to go up to $4 a gallon. Tens of thousands of people are going to lose their jobs. I think the facts are different, and I want to highlight those for you. So if you'll indulge me, I do have some notes here. I'll have to consult to them every now and then. But I think you should enjoy this. I hope you do. Please give me your feedback. I welcome it. I've really enjoyed reading everybody's observations. I'm trying to get better as we go through this as well. So, how much oil do we use every day in the United States? Well, once again, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the United States, every day, this is in 2019, so this is pre-COVID, so these numbers are down significantly now, and they'll probably stay down because I think COVID's going to change our economy. It's going to change the way we live and work. 20.54 million barrels per day. That's how much the United States used in 2019, on average. We used 7.5 billion, with a B as in boy or bravo or brilliant, in 2019. 7.5 billion barrels of oil. The U.S. imports 9.14 billion barrels per day. So that's import. That's coming into the United States. Okay. 74% of that is crude oil. It has not been refined. It's pretty significant. We have very robust refining capacities here in the United States. And so most of what we get is crude oil from other countries. We export. 2019 now, keep in mind, we've seen a significant increase in U.S. energy production because of fracking and other ways, other means of extracting oil from the ground. And the United States is actually exporting oil now. And both the Obama and Trump administrations deserve significant credit for that, for expanding our organic or our internal production capabilities and capacities. We export 8.47 million barrels per day. Our imports, oil coming into the United States, come from these are the big countries: Canada, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Colombia. 48% of the oil exported into the United States, okay, 74% of which is crude oil, but 48% of the oil coming into the United States comes from Canada. They are our biggest energy, friend, I guess you would say, or that's where we get most of our oil, is from Canada, 48%. Now, what a lot of people don't understand is that even without Keystone XL, Canada is still expanding its capability to export oil into the United States, specifically crude. Reuters has done a really good article, and I'll hyperlink it to the presentation here. Currently, Canada exports 3.8 million barrels per day to the United States. But because they are expanding existing pipelines, and also keep in mind, they use rail and they use trucks, interstate trucks, tractor trailers, to export oil into the United States, that is expected to grow to 4.4 million barrels per day from Canada into the United States without Keystone XL. The reason the Canadians, one assessment, or one reason some people cite, one reason the Canadians are so keen to get Keystone XL up and running, is because right now there's a glut. The Canadians are having to store their oil, and that costs money to store oil. It costs money to have storage facility or tanker cars and things of that nature to keep it there, and it's not making money if it's just sitting in a stockyard somewhere. Now, according to Rystad Energy, which is quoted in the Reuters story, by 2025, based on current production, current work going on Canadian pipelines, Canada will be able to export 950,000 barrels per day as they expand their currently existing pipelines. And that'll be by 2025. It's not like without Keystone, Canadian oil is going to go away. These are sophisticated business people. TransCanada is owned by the province of Alberta. These people have been in this business for some time and they're rather good at it. They will find a way to get their crude to market. But what we need to understand is that there are bigger policy reasons at play here. Such things as climate change and different approaches to it by the Biden administration compared to the Trump administration. And also a different focus. Things change. During the Trump administration, we talked a great deal and worked a great deal to gain energy independence for the United States. Well, now that that's being achieved, or really been achieved, and especially since COVID, since we're going to see people probably stay home a lot more in the workplace of the future, well, maybe things change. Maybe we need to consider a different approach. Maybe we don't need a Keystone XL pipeline. And also, the president has decided that he's going to focus on reducing the carbon reliance of the United States. And in doing so, the Biden administration has said that to permit the Keystone XL pipeline to go through would contradict, or just work against the larger focus areas of the Biden administration, the larger objectives of U.S. domestic and foreign policy. Now, think about this, ladies and gentlemen. Let's talk a little bit about the Keystone XL pipeline and the backstory for you. As mentioned, 830,000 barrels per day coming into the United States once completed. But think about this. When the Obama administration in 2015 denied the permit, one of the things the Obama administration cited was that this is going to advantage Canada way more than it will advantage the United States. This will go through Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. Public and private land, agricultural land, grazing areas, aquifers, endangered species, to pump Canadian oil through U.S. territory to get to the Gulf of Mexico. And it's not like without it, the Canadians won't be able to get their crude out of their country. They're just going to have to find other means. And they already have existing pipelines that can do this. So the Obama administration denied the permit. Well, in doing that, 2015, State Department, actually, here's the deal. As mentioned, the State Department was charged with doing the environmental impact study and statement, to develop the statement. They wrote an 8-volume study, multiple government agencies. There was comment, there was review by the public, 8 volumes. And as mentioned, I put the executive summary here for you. It's 27 pages. It's an excellent read. Well, why did the State Department do that? Because there's what's called Executive Order 13337, which was signed in 2004. And it was signed by a Republican president named George W. Bush. Anytime some project from a foreign country crosses the border of the United States as it relates to energy, Keystone XL being one because it's coming from Alberta into the United States, the President of the United States has directed the State Department will develop the environmental impact statement. And then the President may choose to issue a permit for the pipeline, for the project to go through, if it is in the best interest of the United States. Well, President Obama determined that it was not in the best interest of the United States. That was in 2015. In 2017, President Trump reversed President Obama's decision and allowed the Keystone XL pipeline to continue. Now, in 2018, a federal court actually blocked construction of the Keystone XL pipeline, and they said the reason for that was because the study was inadequate, there was inadequate comment and review, and there's some other procedural errors with it. And the Supreme Court actually upheld that decision by a federal court. It didn't say it couldn't go through, it just said that the procedure was flawed and had to go back through the legal process. Towards the end of this, we're going to talk a little bit about the law. And what I think, as a Republican, as a conservative, I think where we have really missed the boat as conservatives, because we were the ones who shaped these great laws that make great policies happen. So 2018, federal court blocks it, and then of course in 2021, President Biden signs an executive order, which I haven't seen the number. I actually read it online, and I would challenge all of you, and I would challenge those on TV who are talking about the Keystone XL pipeline. I ask, have you read the executive order? Do you know the contents of it? I think it's section 6. And it says, here's the deal. The Biden administration says that continued construction of the Keystone XL pipeline is misaligned. It's incongruent with the policy focus of the Biden administration to reduce the use of carbon-based fuels. That's it. So it would go against, it's hypocritical if I say, hey, I'm trying to get us off carbon-based fuels, I'm trying to get us off fossil fuels, reduce oil, things of that nature. Oh, but I'm going to let this massive pipeline continue to be built through the United States. 1.2 miles have been completed. Now, how many of these politicians, how many of these people in the media, people on the talking heads, the blowhards, How many of them understand the process used to get this oil from Canada to the Gulf Coast of the United States and what this means? One thing the Biden administration and others have pointed out is that this is an energy intensive way to get oil, and it's environmentally destructive and hazardous. It's going in the wrong direction. It's not so much against oil, but this specific type of oil production. So what the Keystone XL Pipeline is bringing is what's crude oil from the tar sands of Alberta, Canada. And what this contains, and it's in the EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement from the State Department, it explains it very well, is through the use of mining or steam, this material is extracted from the ground. And it contains bitumen. And bitumen's kind of like soft asphalt. That's how they describe it in the EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement. And it's a mixture of sand, clay, and water. The other thing is they have to actually put dilutants into it to actually make it go through that pipeline. So it takes a lot of energy to just get it through that pipeline. And this is a very dirty material. Okay, it's not kind of like the stuff you put into the gas tank or something like that. Which, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, but according to the Energy Information Administration, each 42-gallon barrel of oil that we get in the United States, when it's refined, gives us 19 to 20 gallons of gasoline and 11 to 12 gallons of diesel fuel. Numbers matter. And I think we're throwing all these numbers around, but they mean something. They mean, hey, that 42-gallon barrel of oil equals, boom, 19 to 20 gallons of gasoline. But we're talking about something much different than gasoline here. We're talking about this very dirty type of crude oil that has bitumen, dilutants, mud, sand, clay, everything pumping through this 36-inch pipeline that goes across multiple states, public and private land, aquifers, agriculture, grazing. If you're trying to achieve energy independence, there are reasons to permit this. If you've achieved some degree of energy independence, and yet you're now trying to remove the United States from a reliance on carbon-based fuels, well, there are reasons to revoke the permit. And that's all pursuant to Executive Order 13337, signed by President Bush in 2004. Now, in the Environmental Impact Statement, it makes some great points about this Keystone Pipeline. It talks about the process used. It talks about the study. It's a primary source. These are experts. These are people in the government and private industry who commented as well, who discussed how this would be created, how this would be constructed, how it would be operated. It also points out, these are 2011 numbers, that since June of 2010 to 2011, there were a number of spills. There were 14 spills. 7 were fewer than 10 gallons. 4 were fewer than 100 gallons. 2 were 400 to 500 gallons. And 1 was 21,000 gallons. PolitiFact. A lot of people have made noise lately and said, hey, this is going to destroy jobs. It's going to take away well-paying jobs from Americans. It's going to hurt the poor. It's going to hurt the middle class and others. Well, first of all, let's talk about the middle class. Canada will find a way to get its oil out of Canada. World demand for oil has declined dramatically and will probably stay that way for some time. And there's a lot of excess capacity in the Middle East right now because no one's buying it. And that's a story that many people have missed, because if there's unrest in the Middle East now, imagine what it's going to be like when all these Persian Gulf countries can no longer feed and house and give these people these wonderful perks they have because their oil largesse. So it will still be there, but it'll be going through different avenues. And now let's talk about the employment piece. Now, according to PolitiFact, PolitiFact is a great resource. I love PolitiFact. They looked at the numbers of people who would be hired, jobs, things of that nature to be created. And the numbers they came up with, this is TransCanada, the company that is running the Keystone XL Pipeline project, the company that wants it. They said there would be 11,000 jobs and $1.6 billion in wages. But this would be temporary. These are construction jobs, which, hey, people need to work. Absolutely. Roger that. I got that. But it's not like these jobs have just been quashed. It's not like these jobs are permanent jobs. I think politicians have a tendency to exaggerate environmental impacts and economic impacts. Exaggeration is in their best interest because it causes you or others to be afraid, it causes you to be angry, and sometimes I think it causes us to disengage from the issues. So the State Department, in its environmental impact statement, noted that there would only be 50 jobs. 50 jobs that I believe would last more than a year or two when the Keystone XL Pipeline is completed. And that's to run the pipeline. Okay, they had some pump stations and things of that nature, some monitoring stations, but only 50 jobs would be created by the Keystone XL Pipeline. 35 of those would be permanent, 15 of those would be temporary, and many of those would actually be in Canada, not the United States. So this record lets you understand that there was a reason the Obama administration said no. There was a reason the Trump administration said yes. And now there's this understanding of why the Biden administration has said no. I'm not trying to take a side here. What I'm trying to do is give you an idea that there's a greater picture here. There are greater issues at stake. There are greater tools for you to use to be a more informed citizen. People in the media, people in politics have an interest in manipulating you. But at the end of the day, they work for us. And they're going to be as responsible. Their responsibility, their level of intellect will rise to our level of scrutiny. We should demand more of them, better of them. The last thing I just want to go into detail about is this. As you know, I'm a Republican. I'm a conservative. I believe in the conservative approach to government. Listen, liberals and conservatives, we agree on many things. I think we all want progress. We all want to live in a safe, stable, prosperous, just world. It's the means by which we acquire that how we get there. Those are different. See, as a conservative, you believe in institutions. You believe in deliberate action. Things should be slow and steady and employ these natural forces like the market, forces like the family or religion. Things, these natural laws to guide behavior, to guide society. I don't believe in, somebody coming down from on top or somebody from the government. You cannot engineer outcomes. Now, why I say that is this. Republicans, we used to own this issue. We owned it. We were the ones who developed environmental legislation, not the Democrats. See, go into detail about this for a second. Please, I don't mean to take too much of your time, but I'm passionate about this. In 1962, there was a book called Silent Spring, written by Rachel Carson, and it led to the birth of the modern environmental movement. Now, in the 60s, we talked a great deal about civil rights, racial justice, the poor. Those are great things. And there's a way conservatives can approach that as well. But the 60s were dominated, I think, by those things. And then in the 70s, we get into environmental justice and justice based on gender and sex, women's rights. So 1962, Silent Spring. And then, boom, 1969, one of my favorite presidents was elected. It was Richard Nixon. 68 he was elected. 69 he became president. He actually swore in. In 1969, President Nixon launched some of the most groundbreaking environmental legislation in the world. You had what's known as the National Environmental Policy Act, the NEPA. And those of you who've ever taken environmental law, and if you live in a place like Florida, environmental law, I think you have to know it because we are blessed with an extraordinary environment here that we have to protect. But the NEPA said this: anytime the federal government takes an action that can impact the environment, a comprehensive statement, a comprehensive study is required. And that's put into an environmental impact statement by that agency, telling what the impacts will be. And then it's open to notice and hearing and comment by the public, and you can modify the course of action from there. So if it's something such as federal funding for a highway, or if it's military activities, the use of an airfield or construction of an airport, certain, boom, allowing the Keystone Pipeline to come through the United States. This environmental impact statement is required. And this is all public knowledge. You can read these. They're extraordinary reading. They're good reading. This was signed by President Nixon, one of the most conservative presidents we had of the 20th century. I think he's an underrated president. I mean, I don't excuse Watergate or anything, but the legislation he passed and signed was pretty awesome. Well, clean air. We take clean air for granted in the United States. Many of us were born well after the Clean Air Act. But what we don't understand is that there were no controls in the past on emissions. You could put whatever you wanted in the air. If you Google and you go to the Wikipedia page for the Clean Air Act, which, by the way, was signed in 1970, President Nixon, it shows a picture of a factory that's burning used car batteries. And then after the Clean Air Act was passed, it was shut down. Now imagine if you have asthma, or maybe your child has asthma. Do you want to live near that? In fact, what's saddest, in my opinion, what's the most terrible thing about the environment for us is that quite often there's something called a tragedy of the commons. And it's where it's those who do it don't pay the price for it. It's other people. The cost is shifted. So for instance, maybe I use a lot of whatever and I emit a lot of greenhouse gases or burn a lot of things and cause a lot of smoke. Well, smoke doesn't land in my yard, it lands in my neighbor's yard. The cost is shifted to him or her. And we know that minorities are dramatically and the unjust impacts of the environment on minority communities. So, Clean Air Act, 1970, President Nixon. Well, what about Clean Water Act? Boom, President Nixon. The Endangered Species Act, 1973, President Nixon. I think it was 1 January 1970, the Environmental Protection Agency was stood up by President Nixon. Conservatives used to own these issues, and we owned them because we brought deliberation and foresight to them. We were disciplined in our approaches. Steady change, the use of institutions, rational thinking. A good environment is not just good for people, it can be good for the economy. Can you imagine Florida if we had a bad environment in Florida? Who would want to live here? How much would we lose? And I think it's funny and it's ironic to me that one of the most Promethean presidents on matters of the environment was a Republican, President Nixon. I want to highlight one last thing for you, and then I'll be quiet. It's the larger issue here. I doubt that you will find many people in politics or in the media, popular media. I shouldn't say all media because Reuters is media, The Economist is media. But this idea of the use of primary sources, this idea of actually reading and thinking about issues. We don't think about issues anymore. We tweet. Well, a tweet's not really a thought. Yeah, it's a thought. But how much intellectual effort goes into it? Not many. Not much. I wish our leaders would think. But here's the bigger picture, ladies and gentlemen. You got the left, and you have the right. Most of us live, and any thinking person, in my opinion, lives right here, in the center. Now, granted, I find myself, I'm a little bit, probably a little over here, but I'm kind of crazy and weird. And I have friends who are a little bit over here. But what we have in our country today is we have an information environment where the only people who feel like they can express their opinions are people on the far left and the far right. A lot of emotion at these two poles. Not a lot of deliberation. Black, white, my way, no way, zero sum, gain, loss, false dichotomy, either or. Notice when they talk, how angry they are. What's your fact? What's your proof? Well, I don't need proof. I just know it. Your feelings are not facts. Think. But on these two ends, this polarized environment we have in politics and in our information environment, both of these sides know if I can make things so distasteful, I can make this shrink. I can make this wane in power. And so what they try to do is constantly expand their sphere of influence. Maybe they don't even have to add to their numbers. All they have to do is cause this to shrink, to make you so disgusted and so angry that you just tune out. You don't vote. You don't read the good news. You don't look for the other side of the story. I think that's one of the great things about this recent election was, one, more people showed up to vote. Of course, yes, my guy lost, but more people showed up to vote. More people joined in the political process. More people had their voices heard. Now what we need to do is we, the silent majority, the rational center, the thinking people, the people for whom the politicians and the media work, we need to stop this decline and expand this right here. These two poles cannot govern our society in the long run. I abhor extremism in any form or fashion, be it on the left or the right, because extremism is not freedom. Freedom lives here. I've talked a lot tonight. I apologize for going over. I look forward to your comments. But the bigger picture here is that there are sources and tools out there for you to be a more informed voter, a more informed decision maker, a more informed citizen. And I hope I've just given you a few of those at the top and explained this issue. To me, I think we need to make our voices heard now, and they need to be loud. And we need to let those in Washington, those in the media and other places know that we're the authority. The people are where political authority lies. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time tonight. I look forward to hearing your questions or observations. Have a great evening, and let me know what you think. Have a great evening.